It was nearly midnight when the phone rang in Dr. James Miller's veterinary office. Rain was pounding against the windows with an ominous intensity as the veterinarian, who was organizing his final reports for the day, felt his heart race when he recognized Green Valley Farm's number. The distressed voice of Mike, the farm's most experienced manager, sounded urgent on the other end of the line. Patches, their most valuable cow, a champion milk producer and pride of the farm, had gone into labor earlier than expected, and something seemed wrong. The sound of rain intensified as James grabbed his emergency kit, and memories from 30 years ago began to surface in his mind. Unwanted and vivid, James drove down the slippery road with his eyes fixed ahead and hands tight on the steering wheel, trying to push away memories of his first case as a veterinarian, a complicated birth that ended in tragedy. The headlights cut through the darkness, while he mentally reviewed all possible procedures. The case from 3 decades ago had profoundly marked him, shaping much of who he had become as a professional. That night, like tonight, had also poured heavily, and he was just an inexperienced young vet. Full of theory but light on practice, the loss of that cow and her calf had haunted him for years, and now, like an echo from the past, another similar situation was unfolding. The gates of Green Valley Farm swung open at his arrival, and James could see several flashlights moving near the main barn. The rain had lessened to a drizzle, but the air remained heavy and tense. Mike waited at the barn entrance, his usually calm face now etched with worry. The manager was known for his experience with dairy cattle and his level-headed temperament. Seeing him in this state only emphasized the gravity of the situation. As they quickly walked through the barn corridor, the familiar smell of fresh hay and feed mixed with something different, something James instantly recognized as the distinctive odor of a complicated birth. When he entered the space where Patches lay, James immediately realized his worst fears were confirmed. The cow was lying on her side, her breathing heavy and irregular, her eyes revealing a silent suffering that broke the hearts of everyone present. With precise movements automated by years of experience, James began examining the animal, his mind working through different scenarios and possibilities. It was when his experienced fingers touched the cow's belly that he felt something that made his blood run cold. The calf was in a completely wrong position, and time was rapidly running out for both animals. The veterinarian slowly stood up, his face illuminated by the bright emergency floodlights that had been set up in the barn. Everyone present could see the gravity in his expression, but also an iron determination in his eyes. "We need to act now," he said, removing his coat and rolling up his sleeves. The next few hours would be crucial, and James knew that tonight could be his chance at redemption, to prove to himself that he had learned from the mistakes of the past. But first, he needed to focus on saving 2 lives that depended entirely on his skills and experience. The emergency lights cast long shadows across the barn floor as James methodically prepared his equipment. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool night air, and his mind raced through years of experience, searching for similar cases and their outcomes. Mike stood nearby, his weathered hands gripping a flashlight so tightly his knuckles had turned white. 2 young farm hands waited anxiously at the ready, their eyes fixed on the veterinarian's every move. Patches let out another low moan of distress, and James knew they were working against a merciless clock. The initial examination revealed what years of experience had taught him to fear most: a breech birth, complicated by the calf's twisted position in normal circumstances. This would be challenging enough, but Patches was exhausted from hours of unsuccessful labor, and her strength was rapidly fading. James could feel the tension in the air as he explained the situation to Mike, his voice steady despite the gravity of the moment. They would need to reposition the calf manually, a delicate and dangerous procedure that would test both his skill and the cow's endurance. The risks were high, but doing nothing would certainly result in losing both animals. Through the barn's open door, James could see the first hints of lightning illuminating the distant sky. A storm was approaching, adding another layer of urgency to their situation. He had Mike position the portable lights exactly where he needed them and instructed the farm hands on what he might need. The familiar weight of his veterinary sleeve felt reassuring as he prepared for the procedure. Patch's breathing had become more labored, and James knew that every minute counted. He took a deep breath, silently promising both mother and calf that history would not repeat itself tonight. Working with practiced movements, James began the difficult process of repositioning the calf. His arms moved with precision, guided by decades of experience and countless similar procedures. Though few as critical as this one, he could feel the calf's limbs twisted in ways that made natural birth impossible, and slowly, methodically, began the painstaking work of adjusting its position. Patches remained surprisingly calm, as if sensing that this man was her only hope. The only sounds in the barn were the distant rumble of thunder and his quiet words of reassurance to the struggling animal. Time seemed to slow as James worked, each movement deliberate and careful. He was acutely aware of every shift, every adjustment, knowing that one wrong move could spell disaster. The memories of his first failed case tried to surface again, but he pushed them aside, focusing entirely on the present moment. This time would be different. It had to be different. As he made progress in repositioning the calf, he could feel Patch's muscles tensing with another contraction. The next few minutes would be critical, and James steeled himself for what he knew would be the most challenging part of the procedure. Thunder cracked overhead as James made the final adjustments to the calf's position. His arms ached from the delicate work, but years of experience had taught him to ignore such discomfort. The atmosphere in the barn was electric with tension, as everyone present understood they were reaching the critical moment. Mike stood ready with fresh towels and warm water, while the farmhands maintained their positions. Watching intently, James could feel the calf's heartbeat, still strong despite the ordeal, which gave him hope. Now came the most dangerous part, guiding both mother and calf through the actual birth. Patches let out a low, guttural moan that echoed through the barn. James recognized this sound. It meant the final stage of labor was beginning. He spoke softly to the cow, his voice carrying decades of compassion and authority. The bond between a veterinarian and their patient was something special, almost mystical, and right now that connection was more important than ever. He could sense Patches responding to his voice, her muscles relaxing slightly despite the pain. The rain continued its steady drumming on the barn roof, creating a rhythmic backdrop to their intense struggle. With expert precision, James began guiding the calf through the birth canal, his movements synchronized with Patch's contractions. Every push was critical now, and he found himself counting under his breath, timing each effort perfectly. The farmhands watched in amazement as this dance of life unfolded before them. Seeing firsthand why Dr. Miller's reputation extended throughout the county, time seemed to stand still in the barn, the outside world forgotten as everyone focused on the miracle taking place before them. The only sounds were Patch's labored breathing and James's quiet words of encouragement. Finally, after what seemed like hours but was probably only minutes, James felt the shift he'd been waiting for. The calf was now properly aligned, and with each contraction it moved closer to life. He could see the relief in Mike's eyes. The experienced farm manager knew enough to recognize when things were turning for the better. But James kept his focus absolute. He'd seen too many last-minute complications to celebrate early. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, supporting and guiding, letting nature take its course while standing ready to assist at any moment. The storm outside reached its peak, just as James caught his first glimpse of the calf. The timing felt almost theatrical, nature's own announcement of the impending arrival. He could feel Patches gathering her strength for the final push, and he prepared himself for the moment of truth. The next few minutes would determine if his experience and skill would be enough to overcome the complications that had threatened this birth from the start. As another contraction began, James took a deep breath, knowing that everything he'd learned in 30 years of veterinary practice would be put to the test in these crucial moments. With one final powerful push from Patches, the calf slid into James's waiting arms. It was a big bull calf, much larger than average, which explained some of the complications. For a heart-stopping moment, the newborn lay still, and James felt that old familiar dread creeping in. Then, as he quickly cleared the calf's airways, a shuddering breath broke the silence, followed by a weak but definite moo. The sound sent waves of relief through everyone in the barn. Mike let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding, and the young farmhands broke into tired smiles. But James knew their work wasn't done yet. The next few minutes would be crucial for both mother and calf. Working swiftly, James began the post-birth procedures while Mike and the others helped clean the newborn. The calf was magnificent, despite his difficult entry into the world, pure black with a distinctive white patch on his forehead. Just like his mother, James monitored Patches closely as she delivered the afterbirth, checking for any signs of complications. Her vital signs were strong, her eyes alert and already seeking her calf. These were all good signs, but experience had taught James to remain vigilant. He remembered too well how things could change quickly in these crucial first moments. The storm outside had begun to fade, as if nature herself was acknowledging the successful birth. Through the barn's open door, James could see the first hints of dawn breaking on the horizon. He watched with satisfaction as the calf, already showing remarkable strength, made its first wobbly attempts to stand. Mike had positioned him near Patches, and the mother cow was doing her part, encouraging her baby with gentle moos and nudges. It was these moments that made all the hardships of veterinary practice worthwhile, seeing new life enter the world against all odds. Watching the natural bond between mother and offspring develop, James methodically documented every aspect of the birth and the condition of both animals while keeping a watchful eye on their progress. The calf had managed to stand and was already attempting to nurse. Another excellent sign, Patches remained calm and attentive, her earlier distress forgotten as she focused on her newborn. The farmhands had begun cleaning up, their movements quiet and efficient. Careful not to disturb the new mother and her calf, the atmosphere in the barn had transformed from one of tense anxiety to peaceful relief. Though James knew from experience to maintain his professional vigilance as he packed his equipment, James allowed himself a small smile of satisfaction. This birth had been one of the most challenging of his career, but the outcome had been everything he could have hoped for. He thought back to that similar night 30 years ago, and for the first time, the memory brought something other than pain. It brought a sense of completion, of lessons learned and experience earned. Mike approached him with coffee in a thermos, and as they stood watching mother and calf together, the farm manager's usual stoic expression broke into a genuine smile. "You did it, Doc," he said simply, but those 3 words carried the weight of all the tension and fear they'd experienced through the night. The early morning sun cast long shadows across the farmyard as James completed his final checks on Patches and her calf. The new mother was recovering well, showing all the right signs of post-birth health. While the calf had already mastered the art of nursing, the barn had settled into a peaceful rhythm. So different from the tension-filled atmosphere of just hours before, James recorded his observations in his medical log, his handwriting precise despite his exhaustion. This case would be one worth reviewing later, perhaps even sharing with veterinary students, as an example of complicated birth management. Mike brought him another cup of coffee as the farm began stirring to life with the usual morning activities. News of the successful birth had spread quickly through the farm staff, and workers arriving for the morning shift stopped by the barn to catch a glimpse of the new arrival. The calf had already been nicknamed Thunder by one of the young farmhands in honor of the storm that had accompanied his dramatic entry into the world. James watched with professional satisfaction as the calf demonstrated remarkable vitality, already showing the strong characteristics of his breeding line. Patches remained attentive but relaxed, her earlier distress now just a memory. The bond between mother and calf was developing beautifully, another positive sign after such a difficult birth. James took advantage of the quiet morning to discuss aftercare with Mike and his team. He outlined a detailed care plan for both mother and calf, emphasizing the importance of monitoring them closely over the next few days. Though the immediate danger had passed, experience had taught him that vigilance was crucial in these early days. The farm manager took careful notes, asking pertinent questions that reflected his years of experience with dairy cattle. Their conversation was occasionally interrupted by the soft sounds of Patches gentling mooing to her calf, a sound that brought a smile to everyone's faces. It was moments like these that reminded James why he had chosen this profession as he prepared to leave. James conducted one final examination of both animals. The calf's strength continued to impress him, already steady on his legs and showing healthy interest in his surroundings. Patches had passed all post-birth checks with flying colors, her vitals strong and stable. James felt that familiar surge of professional pride. Knowing that his intervention had made the difference between tragedy and triumph, he scheduled a follow-up visit for the next day, though he was confident that with Mike's experienced oversight, mother and calf would continue to thrive. The morning light now filled the barn completely, highlighting the peaceful scene of maternal bonding. Before heading to his truck, James paused at the barn door for one last look. The scene before him was a perfect picture of agricultural life, mother and calf resting contentedly in fresh hay, farm workers going about their morning routines, and the sun rising over the green fields beyond. The events of the night had tested him in ways that reminded him of his earliest days as a veterinarian. But this time experience had won out over uncertainty. As he drove away from Green Valley Farm, James reflected that while every birth was unique, this one would hold a special place in his memories, not for its challenges, but for its redemptive power in laying old ghosts to rest. Driving back to his clinic, James felt the weight of the night's events settling over him. The morning traffic was just beginning to build, creating a strange contrast to the intense agricultural drama he'd just experienced. His thoughts drifted between the successful birth and his memories of that similar case 3 decades ago. The parallels were striking, but the outcomes couldn't have been more different. He remembered being that young vet, fresh out of school. Facing his first critical case alone back then, his technical knowledge hadn't been enough to compensate for his lack of practical experience. Now, 30 years later, he could appreciate how each case, successful or not, had contributed to the veterinarian he'd become. The clinic was quiet when he arrived. His assistant Sarah not due for another hour. James took advantage of the solitude to update his medical records, while the details were still fresh in his mind. He documented every aspect of the birth, the initial presentation, the complications, the techniques he'd used to reposition the calf, and the successful outcome. These records were more than just clinical requirements. They were valuable references for future cases. As he wrote, he found himself adding personal notes about the intuitive decisions he'd made, the kind of insights that came only from years of experience. The morning sun streamed through his office window, making the events of the night seem almost dreamlike. The phone rang just as he was finishing his notes. It was Mike from Green Valley Farm calling with an update. Thunder and Patches were doing excellently. The calf was already showing remarkable strength and personality, and Patches had fully recovered from her ordeal. James listened with satisfaction. Making additional notes in the file, Mike's voice carried the warm pride typical of experienced farm managers when discussing their animals. They scheduled the follow-up visit for the next morning, though both men were confident it would be merely a formality. As he hung up the phone, James realized how this case had affected him on a personal level. Sarah arrived to find him still lost in thought at his desk. She could read the signs of an all-night emergency in his tired eyes, but also the satisfaction of a successful outcome in his relaxed posture. As he briefed her on the night's events, her eyes widened at the details of the complicated birth. Despite being relatively new to veterinary work, she understood the significance of such cases. James used the opportunity to share some of his insights, turning the experience into a teaching moment. It was one of the aspects of his profession he had grown to love, passing on knowledge to the next generation of animal care professionals. The morning's appointment schedule would begin soon, bringing its own set of challenges and rewards, but James knew this night would stand out in his memory, not just for the dramatic birth, but for the sense of coming full circle it had given him. That long-ago failure had shaped his career in ways he hadn't fully appreciated until now. As he prepared for his first appointment, he glanced at the old photograph on his wall, his younger self, standing proudly outside his first clinic. He smiled, wishing he could tell that eager young vet that the hardest lessons would ultimately lead to his greatest successes. The next morning arrived with clear skies and mild temperatures. A stark contrast to the previous night's storm. James arrived at Green Valley Farm early, his truck kicking up dust along the familiar dirt road. News of Thunder's dramatic birth had spread through the local farming community, and he'd received several calls from colleagues interested in the details. As he parked near the barn, he could see that quite a few people had gathered to catch a glimpse of the new arrival. Mike stood at the barn entrance, greeting him with the satisfied expression of a manager whose prize cow and calf were thriving against the odds. The atmosphere was celebratory rather than anxious, a welcome change from his last visit. Inside the barn, Patches and Thunder had been moved to a larger stall filled with fresh straw. The calf was already showing remarkable development, his legs steady beneath him as he explored his surroundings. With typical bovine curiosity, James conducted his examination methodically, noting Thunder's strong vital signs and excellent nursing reflexes. Patches remained calm throughout the checkup, her maternal instincts clearly well established. The bond between mother and calf was evident in their interactions, Thunder staying close to his mother while displaying the healthy independence crucial for proper development. Several of the farmhands paused in their morning duties to watch the examination, their pride in the farm's newest addition obvious during the examination. James took time to explain various aspects of newborn calf care to a young veterinary intern who had asked to observe. Teaching had become one of the most rewarding aspects of his practice, and this case provided excellent learning opportunities. He pointed out the subtle signs of good health in both mother and calf, the proper techniques for examination, and the importance of maintaining detailed records, the intern listened intently, asking thoughtful questions that reminded James of his own early days in the profession. Mike joined in occasionally, adding valuable insights from his years of practical experience managing the farm's breeding program. James noticed something special about Thunder that he hadn't seen in the chaos of the birth, a distinctive pattern in his facial markings that made him particularly photogenic. Several visitors had already taken pictures, and Mike mentioned that the local farming newsletter wanted to feature the story of the dramatic birth. James found himself sharing the technical details of the complicated delivery. Though he downplayed his own role in the successful outcome, the farmhands who had assisted that night, however, weren't shy about describing the skill and dedication their vet had displayed. Their retelling of events made James realize how much the community valued and respected his work. As he completed his final checks and prepared to leave, James felt a deep sense of professional satisfaction. This case would likely become one of the memorable milestones in his career, not just for the technical challenges overcome, but for the way it had brought his veterinary journey full circle. Mike walked him to his truck, discussing follow-up care and future checkups. Though both men knew Patches and Thunder were well past any danger, the morning sun illuminated the peaceful farm scene, and James could hear Thunder's occasional moos mixing with the regular sounds of farm life. It was moments like these that reminded him why he had chosen this path 30 years ago. Back at his clinic, James found himself busier than usual with calls from local farmers interested in discussing difficult births and complications. Thunder's story had spread quickly through the rural community, sparking conversations about best practices in animal care. Sarah had efficiently organized his schedule to accommodate these consultations while maintaining time for regular appointments. As he settled into his office chair, James began organizing his notes from the case, knowing they would prove valuable for future reference. The morning's follow-up visit had confirmed what he'd hoped. Sometimes the most challenging cases could become the best teaching opportunities. During lunch, he received a call from Dr. Emily Chen, a former colleague now teaching at the state veterinary school. She had heard about Thunder's birth through their professional network and was interested in using the case as a teaching example for her students. James spent an hour carefully detailing the procedural aspects of the birth, the decision-making process, and the crucial factors that had led to success. Dr. Chen's enthusiasm reminded him of their shared passion for educating the next generation of veterinarians. They discussed the possibility of James giving a guest lecture about complicated births. Using this case as a prime example of how experience and technical knowledge work together in critical situations, the afternoon brought a steady stream of regular appointments, vaccinations, checkups, and minor treatments. But James found his thoughts repeatedly returning to Thunder and Patches. Each case he handled reminded him of some aspect of that challenging night. While examining a young calf with a mild respiratory issue, he found himself sharing parts of Thunder's story with the concerned farmer, using it to illustrate the importance of early intervention and proper care. The farmer listened intently, clearly drawing parallels to his own situation. It struck James how one dramatic case could provide so many teaching moments and opportunities to connect with his clients. Sarah noticed how the successful birth had energized her employer, bringing a renewed enthusiasm to his work. She had been compiling a detailed file of the case, including James's notes and the follow-up observations, recognizing its value for the clinic's records. During a quiet moment between appointments, she suggested creating a small bulletin board display about Thunder's birth for the waiting room, knowing it would interest their rural clients. James agreed, appreciating how the story could help illustrate the clinic's commitment to handling challenging cases. He found himself mentally composing the narrative, wanting to emphasize the teamwork aspect between veterinarian, farm staff, and the animals themselves. As the day drew to a close, James received a text from Mike with a photo of Thunder frolicking in the afternoon sun, Patches watching protectively nearby. The image captured perfectly what every veterinarian hopes for, a positive outcome after a difficult case. Looking at the healthy, energetic calf, it was hard to imagine the drama of his birth just over 24 hours ago. James forwarded the photo to Dr. Chen for her teaching file, then sat back in his chair reflecting on how one challenging night had created such widespread positive ripples throughout his professional community. The setting sun cast long shadows through his office window as he finally began preparing to head home, grateful for the reminder of why he had chosen this demanding but rewarding profession. 2 weeks had passed since Thunder's dramatic birth, and James found himself back at Green Valley Farm, this time accompanied by 3 veterinary students. Dr. Chen had arranged for this practical learning session. Knowing the value of hands-on experience in veterinary education, the day was bright and cool, perfect for an outdoor teaching session. As they walked towards the pasture where Patches and Thunder now spent their days, James could see the students' eager expressions. Reminding him of his own early days in the profession, Mike had prepared a small teaching area under a shaded canopy, complete with medical charts and documentation from the birth. Thunder had grown significantly in the past weeks, his black coat gleaming in the sunlight as he romped around his mother. The students watched in fascination as James demonstrated proper examination techniques. Explaining how to approach mother and calf safely while causing minimal stress, he shared specific details about the birth complications they had faced. Using Thunder's case to illustrate various potential challenges in bovine obstetrics, the students took detailed notes, asking insightful questions that showed their genuine interest in learning. James found himself sharing not just technical knowledge, but also the intuitive understanding that comes only with years of experience during the practical demonstration. One of the students asked about the emotional aspects of handling critical cases. James paused thoughtfully before describing the delicate balance between professional detachment and compassionate care. He spoke about his first failed case 30 years ago, explaining how that experience had shaped his approach to veterinary medicine. The students listened intently as he described the importance of learning from both successes and failures. Mike occasionally added his own insights from a farmer's perspective, creating a rich, multifaceted learning experience. Thunder and Patches, meanwhile, provided perfect examples of successful postnatal recovery and development. Later, as they gathered in the farm's office to review medical records and documentation, James emphasized the importance of detailed record-keeping. He showed them his notes from Thunder's birth, explaining how thorough documentation can help in future cases and contribute to the broader field of veterinary medicine. The students were particularly interested in the decision-making process during critical moments, and James described how experience helps one develop quick, accurate judgments. Dr. Chen had been right. This case provided an excellent teaching opportunity, covering multiple aspects of large animal veterinary practice. As the teaching session concluded, James watched the students interacting with Thunder and Patches one final time. Their enthusiasm and dedication gave him hope for the future of veterinary medicine. One student remarked how different the actual practice was from textbook descriptions, and James smiled, remembering his own similar revelation years ago. Mike brought out coffee and sandwiches, and the conversation turned to general farming practices and animal care. In these moments of informal discussion, James knew some of the most valuable learning occurred. The success story of Thunder's birth had transformed into something even more meaningful, a bridge between generations of veterinary professionals. 1 month after Thunder's birth, James received an urgent early morning call from Mike. Something was wrong with Patches. She had refused her morning feed and seemed unusually lethargic. Within 20 minutes, James was driving through the dawn light towards Green Valley Farm, his mind racing through possible scenarios, while post-birth complications weren't common after so many weeks. They weren't unheard of either. Thunder's difficult birth could have left hidden issues that were only now becoming apparent. The peaceful morning landscape contrasted sharply with his growing concern, memories of previous cases flooding his thoughts. Upon arrival, James found Mike and 2 farmhands waiting by Patches' stall. Thunder, now significantly larger and more robust, was being kept in an adjacent pen, showing obvious distress at being separated from his mother. Patches lay on her side, her breathing labored and her eyes dull, a stark contrast to her usual alert demeanor. James immediately began his examination, his experienced hands moving methodically across the cow's body, while Mike provided a detailed timeline of her symptoms. The initial signs pointed to a possible internal infection, but James knew better than to jump to conclusions. Years of experience had taught him that obvious symptoms could sometimes mask more complex issues. The examination revealed slightly elevated temperature and unusual abdominal tenderness, subtle but significant signs that concerned James deeply. He ordered a series of immediate tests. Grateful that he had brought his portable testing kit, while waiting for the results, he observed Patches' behavior closely, noting how she responded to various stimuli. Thunder continued to call for his mother, his distressed moos adding to the tension in the air. The bond between mother and calf had grown remarkably strong over the past month, making their forced separation even more stressful for both animals. Mike stood nearby, his worried expression reflecting the special place Patches held in the farm's breeding program. The test results confirmed James's initial suspicion. Patches had developed a serious internal infection, likely a delayed complication from the difficult birth. The situation was critical but treatable if caught in time, which thankfully they had. James quickly prepared a comprehensive treatment plan, including specialized antibiotics and supportive care. As he administered the initial treatment, he explained the situation to Mike, emphasizing the importance of close monitoring over the next 48 hours. The farm manager listened intently, taking detailed notes and asking pertinent questions. Their long working relationship had created a deep trust. Crucial in situations like this, by mid-morning there were already signs of improvement in Patches' condition. The immediate treatment had begun to take effect, and her vital signs were stabilizing. James arranged for Sarah to deliver additional medications later that day, ensuring continuous treatment. Meanwhile, Thunder had been allowed brief supervised visits with his mother, helping to keep both animals calm. As James prepared to leave, he felt cautiously optimistic, but knew the next 2 days would be crucial. He scheduled multiple follow-up visits, determined not to let this new challenge threaten the success story that Thunder's birth had become. The morning sun now fully illuminated the barn, highlighting both the concern and hope in everyone's faces. The next 48 hours proved to be an intense period of monitoring and adjustment. James made multiple visits to Green Valley Farm, coordinating with Mike to ensure Patches received her treatments at precise intervals. The farm staff had organized a round-the-clock observation schedule, recording every change in her condition. Thunder remained nearby, his presence seeming to provide comfort to his mother, even through the barrier of the pen wall. The young calf's distress at being separated from Patches was evident, but his own health and vigor remained strong, a testament to the excellent care he'd received in his first month of life. During his evening check on the second day, James noticed marked improvement in Patches' condition. Her temperature had stabilized, and she had begun showing interest in food again. The antibiotics were clearly working, fighting back the infection that had threatened her recovery. Mike had maintained meticulous records of her medication schedule and responses, proving once again why he was considered one of the best farm managers in the county. The regular farm routines continued around them, but everyone who passed by Patches' stall paused to check on her progress. The entire farm community had become invested in her recovery. Just as they had celebrated Thunder's dramatic birth, Sarah arrived with the evening medication delivery to find James conducting another thorough examination. She had brought additional testing supplies, allowing them to run a complete set of follow-up tests. Working together efficiently, they collected the necessary samples while causing minimal distress to their patient. Thunder watched attentively from his pen, his behavior remarkably calm for such a young calf. The bond between mother and calf remained strong despite their temporary separation. And James noted how Patches would turn her head to watch her calf whenever he moved. These natural instincts, he knew, could play a crucial role in the recovery process. As night fell, the new test results confirmed what James had hoped. The infection was responding well to treatment. He adjusted the medication doses accordingly. Carefully documenting every change in the treatment plan, Mike brought coffee and sandwiches to the barn, and they discussed the progress while watching Patches rest comfortably for the first time in days. The farm manager shared stories of other challenging cases they'd faced together over the years, but both men agreed that Patches and Thunder held a special place in their memories. The night was quiet except for the usual farm sounds and Thunder's occasional gentle moos to his mother. Before leaving for the night, James allowed Thunder a supervised visit with Patches. The young calf approached his mother carefully, as if sensing her need for gentle interaction. Patches rallied at her calf's presence, showing more energy than she had all day. Watching them together, James felt a deep sense of professional satisfaction, not just at the successful treatment, but at seeing the natural bonds of mother and calf overcome yet another challenge. He left detailed instructions with the night staff, knowing that while the crisis appeared to be passing, vigilance would be crucial for the next 24 hours. The stars were bright overhead as he drove home, his mind already planning the next day's treatment schedule. The morning of the third day brought clear signs that Patches had turned the corner in her recovery. James arrived early to find her standing, alert and interested in her surroundings. A dramatic improvement from just 2 days ago. Her appetite had returned, and Mike reported she had eaten well during the night. Thunder, still separated but closer now, showed obvious excitement at his mother's improved condition. The atmosphere in the barn had shifted from concern to cautious optimism, with the farm staff sharing relieved smiles as they went about their morning routines. The crisis appeared to be passing, though James knew from experience not to declare victory too soon. During his examination, James was pleased to find Patches' vital signs had returned to normal ranges. The infection markers in her blood work had decreased significantly, indicating the aggressive treatment plan had been successful. He began documenting the recovery process as meticulously as he had the treatment. Knowing this case could provide valuable information for future reference, the veterinary students who had visited earlier would be particularly interested in this development. It provided a perfect example of how post-birth complications could arise weeks after an apparently successful delivery. Sarah had already organized the case files to include this new chapter in Patch's story. By midday, James felt confident enough to allow Thunder back into the stall with his mother. The reunion was touching to witness. The young calf immediately went to nurse while Patches gently nuzzled him, checking that he was okay. The farm staff gathered to watch, their emotional investment in these animals evident in their reactions. Mike stood beside James, both men silently acknowledging the importance of this moment. The bond between mother and calf had not only survived their separation, but seemed to have grown stronger through the experience. Even the most experienced farmers present couldn't help but be moved by the scene. The afternoon brought a visit from Dr. Chen and another group of veterinary students who had been following Patch's case with great interest. James took the opportunity to demonstrate how recovery monitoring differed from acute care. Explaining the subtle signs that indicated healing versus potential relapse, the students absorbed every detail, clearly understanding they were witnessing something special. Thunder provided occasional entertainment, showing off his growing strength with playful bursts of energy around his mother. Patches watched her calf with typical maternal patience, her improved condition evident in her relaxed demeanor. As evening approached, James completed his final checks for the day. He adjusted Patch's medication schedule, gradually reducing the dosages as her recovery progressed. The treatment plan would continue for another week, but the critical phase had passed. Mike had already prepared the paperwork for her medical records, including detailed notes about her response to treatment. As James packed up his equipment, he paused to watch mother and calf together in their stall. The scene before him represented everything he loved about veterinary medicine: the challenges, the triumphs, and most importantly, the privilege of helping animals overcome life-threatening situations to return to their normal, healthy lives. 3 months had passed since Thunder's dramatic birth and Patch's subsequent recovery. The case had become something of a legend at the local veterinary college. Where Dr. Chen regularly used it as a teaching example, James sat in his office, reviewing the extensive documentation from both events while preparing for an upcoming lecture. The morning sun streamed through his window, illuminating photographs of Thunder's remarkable progress, from his challenging birth to his current status as one of Green Valley Farm's most promising young bulls. The collection of images and medical records told a story of persistence, skill, and the deep connection between veterinarians and their patients. Earlier that week, a local farming journal had contacted James about featuring the case in their monthly publication as he organized his thoughts for the interview. He reflected on how this single case had impacted so many aspects of his practice. The detailed records of both the birth and Patch's later infection had proven invaluable for teaching purposes. Helping other veterinarians identify and respond to similar complications, Mike had reported that several farmers from neighboring counties had visited Green Valley Farm, specifically to learn about the protocols and procedures that had led to such a successful outcome. The case had become a touchstone for discussing best practices in agricultural veterinary care. Thunder, now a robust young bull, had exceeded everyone's expectations in terms of growth and development. Despite his difficult start in life, he showed all the signs of becoming an exceptional breeding animal. James had continued to monitor both mother and calf during regular checkups, each visit confirming the complete recovery of Patches and the remarkable development of her calf. The farm staff had grown particularly attached to the pair, often sharing updates and photos with James's office. Sarah had created a special wall in the clinic's waiting room dedicated to Thunder's story, which never failed to draw interest from visiting clients. During his last visit to Green Valley Farm, James had spent time observing Thunder in the pasture with other young cattle. The bull calf's strength and vitality showed no signs of his traumatic birth, though the distinctive white patch on his forehead remained a constant reminder of that stormy night. Patches had fully returned to her role as one of the farm's premier breeding cows, her brief illness now just another chapter in her remarkable story. Mike had joked that Thunder's dramatic entrance into the world had set the tone for his personality. Bold, resilient, and impossible to ignore, the farm manager's pride in both animals was evident whenever he discussed them with visitors. As James finished organizing his notes for the journal interview, he found himself reflecting on how this case epitomized the most rewarding aspects of veterinary medicine: the technical challenges of the birth, the emotional investment of everyone involved, the later complications and successful treatment. All had combined to create a story that went beyond mere medical case study. It had become a testament to the importance of experience, quick thinking, and the deep bonds that form between humans and animals in the agricultural community. Sarah knocked on his door, reminding him of his afternoon appointments, but his mind remained on the lessons learned and shared from those crucial nights at Green Valley Farm. 6 months after Thunder's birth, James found himself once again driving to Green Valley Farm on a stormy night. This time, however, he wasn't responding to an emergency. He had been invited to a special gathering organized by the local farming community. The occasion was a celebration of his 30 years in veterinary practice, and Mike had insisted on hosting it at the farm. The rain beating against his windshield brought back vivid memories of that crucial night half a year ago. Though tonight's atmosphere was one of celebration rather than crisis, the headlights of numerous vehicles parked around the main barn indicated that many had braved the weather to attend. Inside the barn, transformed for the evening with strings of lights and decorated tables, James was touched to see faces from throughout his career. Local farmers, fellow veterinarians, former students and community members had gathered to share stories and express their gratitude. Thunder and Patches occupied a special stall of honor. The young bull, now impressively large and strong, showing no signs of his difficult entry into the world, Dr. Chen had brought a new group of veterinary students. Eager to see the subjects of the case study they had been learning about, Mike had arranged for a display of photographs chronicling James's years of service to the farming community. With Thunder's birth story featured prominently, during the evening's presentations, various speakers shared memories of James's impact on their lives and businesses. One elderly farmer recalled how James had saved his entire herd during an outbreak 20 years ago. A former intern, now a successful veterinarian herself, spoke about the lessons she had learned under his mentorship, but it was Mike's speech that particularly moved James. The farm manager described not just Thunder's dramatic birth and Patch's later recovery, but how these events exemplified James's dedication to his profession. He spoke of countless middle-of-the-night calls, difficult decisions made under pressure, and the unwavering commitment to animal welfare that had characterized James's entire career. As James stood to address the gathering, he found himself looking at Thunder in his special stall. The young bull represented everything he loved about veterinary medicine: the challenges, the triumphs, the ongoing cycle of life on the farms he served. He shared with the audience how his very first case 30 years ago had been similar to Thunder's birth, but with a tragic outcome. That experience had driven him to learn, to improve, to never stop striving for better ways to serve his animal patients and their human caretakers. The symmetry of having Thunder's case mark his 30th year of practice seemed somehow appropriate, a testament to lessons learned and wisdom earned. The celebration continued into the evening, with more stories shared and memories recalled. Thunder and Patches garnered their share of attention. With many guests wanting to see the animals they'd heard so much about, the young bull handled the attention with surprising grace, while Patches maintained her characteristic calm demeanor. James found himself repeatedly drawn to their stall, reflecting on how this particular case had somehow encapsulated everything he had learned in 3 decades of veterinary practice. The storm outside had passed, and through the barn's open doors, he could see stars beginning to appear in the clearing sky, a fitting end to a night of celebration and remembrance. 1 year after Thunder's birth, James stood in the doorway of his clinic, watching the sun rise over the rural landscape he had served for so long. The morning light illuminated the now familiar photograph of Thunder and Patches that held a prominent place in his waiting room, alongside other memories from his years of practice. The image had become something of a talisman for the clinic, representing hope and perseverance in the face of difficult odds. That morning, James was preparing to meet with a particularly special visitor, a young veterinary graduate who had chosen to complete her residency at his practice. Inspired partly by Thunder's story, which had become well known in veterinary teaching circles, news had recently arrived from Green Valley Farm that Thunder had been selected as the farm's primary breeding bull. His strong genetics and remarkable health making him an ideal choice for improving the herd. Patches continued to thrive, her story of survival and recovery adding to her value as a breeding cow. Mike regularly sent updates about both animals, knowing how much their progress meant to James. The case had been published in several veterinary journals, with James's detailed documentation helping other practitioners handle similar complicated births. The greatest satisfaction, however, came from knowing that the experience had helped shape the next generation of veterinarians. During his morning rounds, James reflected on how Thunder's case had changed more than just his own practice. Local farmers had implemented many of the monitoring and emergency response procedures that had proved so crucial during both the birth and Patch's later illness. The veterinary college had incorporated the case into their teaching curriculum, using it to demonstrate the importance of both technical skill and intuitive understanding in large animal practice. But perhaps most significantly, the story had reminded everyone in the agricultural community of the deep bonds that formed between the people who cared for animals and the creatures themselves. Sarah, now studying to become a veterinarian herself while continuing to manage the clinic, had organized all the records and documentation from Thunder's case into a comprehensive teaching resource. As James reviewed it with his new resident, he found himself sharing not just the medical details, but the emotional journey of that challenging night and its aftermath. The young graduate listened intently, asking thoughtful questions that reminded James of his own early days in the profession. He could see in her eyes the same passion for veterinary medicine that had driven him for the past 3 decades. And he felt confident that the legacy of care would continue. As the day drew to a close, James made one final visit to Green Valley Farm, standing in the pasture. Watching Thunder with his herd, as the setting sun painted the sky in brilliant colors, he felt a profound sense of completion. The scared young veterinarian who had lost his first difficult case 30 years ago could never have imagined how that failure would drive him to become the practitioner he was today. Thunder's successful birth and Patch's recovery had provided more than just a satisfying medical outcome. They had offered redemption, teaching, and hope. As he turned to leave, Thunder raised his magnificent head and gazed at him with those same determined eyes he'd shown since birth, a living testament to the endless cycle of challenges and triumphs that made veterinary medicine such a remarkable calling.